Welcome to RBC's Markets in Motion podcast, recorded July 7th, 2026. I'm Lori Calvasina, Head of U.S. Equity Strategy at RBC Capital Markets. Please listen to the end of this podcast for important disclaimers. Today, we're discussing the results of our quarterly global RBC Analyst Outlook Survey conducted in late June. The big things you need to know. First, across the globe, our analysts are constructive on performance over the next 6 to 12 months and see attractive valuations in the industries they cover. Second, Europe and Canada captured the most optimistic performance outlooks among our 4 coverage regions, but the U.S. was not far behind. Third, our Canadian and U.S. analysts expressed a favorable view of their own respective domestic policy backdrops. On the midterm elections, our U.S. analysts had a slightly constructive tilt on performance in a Republican sweep, a slightly negative tilt on performance in a Democratic sweep, and a neutral view on performance in a split Congress. Fourth, at the global sector level, performance outlooks were mostly positive and came in stronger than other sectors for materials and industrials, but only by a little. If you'd like to hear more, here's another 5 minutes. Let's start with takeaway number 1. Across the globe, our analysts are constructive on performance over the next 6 to 12 months and see attractive valuations in the industry they cover for the most part. However, they had a neutral or mixed assessment of demand and expressed some concerns about war impacts. The performance and valuation assessments were modestly constructive, but not euphoric. We see the overall results as supportive of a constructive view on global developed market equities in the year ahead, while also highlighting how there is still room to climb a wall of worry or opportunity for upside surprises. Moving on to takeaway number 2. Performance outlooks were positive in all of our coverage regions, strongest in Europe and Canada, but the U.S. was not far behind. Valuation views were also positive in all regions, but strongest in the U.S., an improvement versus our April survey. Demand outlooks were more mixed by region, with constructive views in the U.S. and Canada, a neutral view on Europe, and a slightly negative outlook on Australia. War impacts were seen as a challenge for all regions, most notably Canada and Australia, and to the U.S. to the least extent. Inflation, demand, and commodity prices were the issues most in focus. We think the performance views support the idea that non-U.S. leadership can persist a bit longer, but the other questions on valuation, demand, and war impacts add to our conviction that this may not be a permanent leadership shift and the U.S. can reclaim the lead before too long. Next up, takeaway number 3. Our Canadian and U.S. analysts expressed a favorable view of their own respective domestic policy backdrops. Meanwhile, policy views were more neutral in Europe and Australia. We also asked our U.S. analysts about upcoming midterm elections. They were slightly positive on performance in a Republican sweep scenario, driven by positive tilts from most sectors aside from consumer discretionary staples and healthcare. They were slightly negative on performance in a Democratic sweep scenario, driven by negative views for most sectors ex-discretionary staples and healthcare, and had a neutral view in a Republican Senate Democratic House scenario, driven by neutral views on most sectors ex-healthcare, which captured a slightly positive tilt here. And wrapping up with takeaway number 4. Performance outlooks tilt constructive for most global sectors, with the exception of comm services, discretionary, and staples, which captured more neutral outlooks. As we consider forward performance implications, 3 things jump out to us. First, while materials and industrials technically capture the most optimistic performance outlooks across the globe at the sector level, their lead versus other sectors was very slight. We think that helps to explain why many equity investors we've spoken to over the past few months have been eager to explore sector ideas. They're looking around for new ideas, but it's just not clear to them what to focus on, and our survey results reflected this dynamic as well. Second, energy stood out for capturing a positive score on each of our main questions on performance, valuation, demand, war impacts, and domestic policy. This resonated with us because we've noticed that equity investors, especially those based in Europe, have been more willing to discuss energy. That dynamic and the survey results make us think equity investors may be more open to investing in energy in the future. Third, the wall of worry seems steepest in the consumer-oriented sectors, where performance outlooks are least constructive and demand and war impact concerns are most apparent. We suspect that future outperformance in these sectors could be one of the biggest potential pain trades for the global equity investment community going forward. That's all for now. Thanks for listening, and be sure to reach out to your RBC representative with any questions.
This content is based on information available at the time it was recorded and is for informational purposes only. It is not an offer to buy or sell or a solicitation, and no recommendations are implied. It is outside the scope of this communication to consider whether it is suitable for you and your financial objectives.